Greetings, my name is Tim Johnson. This is Recovery, Strength, Hope and Courage. I've decided to tell my story. It's something I've been debating for a long time now because I've touched on things over the sort of 80 odd videos I've made. I've sort of touched on things that have happened throughout my life, but really never wanted to tell my own story. Hopefully some of you can relate to what I say and it will help some people. This is why I'm doing it. I think the reason I've avoided it for so long is that I didn't really want to feel some of the feelings that telling this may bring up, and I think I wanted to be sure that I was fairly strong into my recovery, which is 15 months in now, before I attempted to do this. And I've thought about it, and I've thought, well, yeah, I feel as though I can revisit this. I'm strong enough to revisit this now, and perhaps it will. Perhaps someone can identify. It won't interest all of you, but I mean, perhaps someone can identify with some of the stuff that I've experienced through my life. And I'm going to tell it in 3 parts. So this video, I don't want to make the videos too long, otherwise it'll just get boring. So I've cut it into 3 parts, and I'm called it sort of trauma, transformation and transcendence, which are sort of the 3 stages. Now, transcendence is a very big, high and mighty, highfalutin word, and I've certainly not reached transcendence that yet. But this is where I'm sort of heading, if you like, and this is my goal. But I'll start from the beginning. Obviously, where else can you start? I was born on the 29th of February 1960, which was a great start, wasn't it? Because that made me different straight away. A leap year baby, so I only had a real birthday every 4 years, although I obviously didn't realise that at the time. But I was born into a middle class, I suppose you would call it middle class family in Liverpool. My father was a bank manager and my mother a physiotherapist. I had a brother who was 2 years younger than me. Who is 2 years younger than me. And we had, on the surface, we lived in a nice sort of 3-bedroomed semi on the Wirral just outside of Liverpool. On the surface, everything was good and hunky-dory, this sort of perfect two-child family living in this nice house, professional parents. Our grandparents ran a butchery business on the Wirral. That's my mother's mother and father, and like I say, on the surface everything was great, but it wasn't, and it was only sort of when I was, I suppose, around about 4 or 5, I realised that something wasn't right, because there was always a lot of shouting and screaming, and my father would disappear and come home very, very late at night, and when he did come home, there was always this massive banging and crashing and rowing. I was a very scared, timid child, I suppose, and this made me scared because, I mean, I'm my brother as well, and we used to have bunk beds. I always remember that my brother would sort of creep up into my top bunk when this screaming and shouting and crashing started. I mean, we never saw any of the physical violence that was obviously going on, but we heard it, and that was enough, and scared us so much that we were even scared to go to the toilet, and to cross the landing to go to the toilet when all this was going on. And I suppose, you don't realise at the time, but it has an effect on you, doesn't it? It's bound to have some sort of effect on you, but I didn't really know what at the time. Then when I was, this went on for a couple of years, it just got worse and worse and worse. And I noticed a change in my mum. She was very, very different. She stopped working. She stopped doing the physiotherapy and was staying home a lot. Anyhow, a couple of years passes, and we were away and out for the day, me and my brother and my mother, and came back. I was 7.5, I think I was. My brother 5.5. And we arrived back at the house after having been out for the day, and it was very quiet, and me and my brother went upstairs as usual, and then my mother went into the lounge, and there was this massive crash and scream, and we obviously ran downstairs quickly, wondering what the hell was going on, bearing in mind I'm sort of 7.5 years old, and my mother was hysterical, collapsed on the floor, and there was a letter open on the floor, and an ashtray smashed, and she was just lying there convulsing, and we were scared. We didn't know what to do. My nana and granddad lived sort of 15-20 miles away, so we knew how to phone them, so managed to use the old-fashioned telephone in those days. No mobiles, obviously, in those days. Phoned my nana and said that what had happened, and that my mum was very upset, and she said she'd come over. Anyway, it turns out that my father had left a note. He'd been back when we were out and cleared his wardrobes and all his possessions out and left. And that was the last time I ever saw and heard from my father, and that was 7.5 years old. He never contacted me, as far as I know. He may well have tried to. It made my mum a very, very bitter and angry person, obviously, what had happened to her. And she never ever forgave him, but I don't think she ever stopped loving him, because she wore, on the day of her death, when we put her in the coffin, when she was in the coffin, she still wore a wedding ring. And this is like 40 odd years later, or whatever, so she never stopped loving him. But basically what happened then was that my mother disintegrated and started drinking very heavily, and also using drugs. She was prescribed Librium, which is a benzodiazepine. I think it's not prescribed massively these days. My father refused. He didn't send us any money for a long time. This all had to go through. In those days, my mother made him wait 5 years for a divorce, and during that period of time, before she could take him to court for money, there was no money forthcoming, and my nana could only support up to a certain extent. But obviously, food was okay, because my nana, they ran a butchery business, but it was very, very tough, and we couldn't get any new clothes, and we were sort of running around like in clothes that were 2-3 years old, sort of threadbare, been repaired and whatever. But the worst part about it was that we used to come home from school, and my mother would be slumped over the sink. There'd be no tea waiting for us or anything. She'd be drunk, incapable of doing anything, pilled up, full of Librium and vodka. I found, I didn't know at the time what it was she was sort of doing to herself, but by this time I was sort of 9 or 10 years old, and so we'd end up sort of preparing our own stuff and getting our own stuff to eat, and more or less looking after ourselves, and running amok, if you like, running a bit wild. And I suppose the first and I sort of, don't get me wrong, I sort of judged my mum on this for many, many years afterwards, and sort of used all this as a bit of an excuse, this background and this abandonment by my father and all the rest of it. And my mum, it made my mum very violent. And we'd already experienced physical abuse from my father. As a young child, my father used to hit us quite a lot, and and used to hold us down and press into our ribs and do all this sort of stuff. And I look back on that, and it wasn't done in a nice way, and I sort of blanked that out of my mind. But my mum, the drinking made my mum violent as well, and as many times she went for us with things like cricket bats. And I remember us ripping the Hoover thing with us and hitting us with a Hoover, hitting me with a Hoover once across the back as I tried to run away up the stair. Many times, many things, which and I sort of blamed my, in the future, I blamed a lot of my addictive and drinking and all the rest of it on that past. But I don't judge her anymore, because I didn't really know the full story, and I sort of judged her very, very quickly, and but she was struggling to try and bring up 2 kids. She'd been abandoned, she'd been beaten herself, and God knows what else, and I didn't really know the full story. And I also found out that she'd found out that my real grandfather had committed suicide when my grandmother was pregnant with her. It was out of wedlock with another man, and they'd eloped, because in those days, obviously, my grandmother, we're talking about very early 1900 and something. They'd eloped and run away to a hotel in Wales. because she was pregnant with my mother. And he shot himself in the head with a shotgun in that hotel bedroom, and my nana discovered him. But she never turned to alcohol or drugs or anything. It just shows you, doesn't it? Trauma affects people in different ways. And is there a gene that causes alcoholism? But my mum, when she found this out, this obviously compounded everything that was going on. That my granddad wasn't a real granddad, and she found all this out after my father had left from my nana. And it. God knows how that affected her, and also, this manic depression, was it passed down? I asked myself those sort of questions as well, like, was there sort of a gene that went down through my mum, me maybe, and whatever, but, there's no point in dwelling on that now. So anyway, we get up to my sort of teens, if you like, and this is when the problems first started, 13, no money, I was mixing with a lot of rough people in the neighbourhood. I was very shy. We'd been bullied at school, and to sort of because we were wearing shit clothes, and my mother always used to make us get short, crew cuts, and the fashion was long hair in those days. But she had this thing of proving something to my dad that she could bring us up properly, but it sort of worked against us in a way, because she made us wear old-fashioned sort of second-hand clothes and shaved heads, and they said it'd be quite fashionable now, but it certainly wasn't in those days. So I was I sort of rebelled a bit, if you like, and my brother avoided all this. I sort of cushioned him from it, if you like, I suppose. And fair play to him, bless him. There was a few things that sort of happened with him, and I think it affected him very deeply, all of it. But he went on. He's never had the same problems as me in his life at all. Certainly not with addiction, and always been a very successful sort of person. So. At 13 years old, I'd started to steal my mum's Librium pills from the cupboard, and also steal alcohol and take it out. And we used to go with my friends in the woods and take these pills and drink this alcohol. And I found it gave me I remember the first time, 13 odd, it took me out of myself, the shyness and from the bullying and because I was class clown as well. I always liked to try and make people laugh for acceptance, really, and went for the roughest people and the bullies, if you like, of the group. I tried to impress them, and I found that the alcohol and taking these pills helped me to lose those inhibitions, if you like, and become part of something that I'd never been before. I was a very lonely child early on. And I was angry as well. I was angry at the world. I was angry with my father and all the rest of it. And about this time, we were really in the shit for money. And I managed to get a part-time job washing up illegally, 14 years old. So I was going from school to a hotel and washing up. And this is where my background sort of went into catering, because I love the atmosphere in the kitchen. But at 14, they were giving me booze and drugs even then, like, the chefs in the kitchen, unwittingly. And I was earning a lot of money, to be fair. I was cash in hand, you see, because the guy didn't want to put me on it was illegal. I was only 14, but I was doing a good job for him. He was an Irish guy, Mr. Kennedy, his name was. And I was fighting to death of him. He only had one eye, and he was a fierce Northern Irish man. And anyway, I used to take about £100 a week back home, which was a lot of money, because I used to work like every night and all day Saturday and all day Sunday, So I didn't have, I was flogging myself to death and trying to go to school as well, and giving my mum the money, thinking that it was helping with the housekeeping and all the rest of it. And it was just going on vodka, and I didn't realise that at the time. I realised it sort of later on. I used to find it hidden all over the house. But I'd given up by then. I was really angry with my mum and bitter, and I didn't understand at all. But I was doing the same sort of things, ironically, So it gets up to 16, and I was told I wasn't going to pass any O-levels. My teachers was telling me I was useless. I had very low self-esteem, because I was being told I was useless by my mother, even though I was working my guts out for her. And I was being told I was useless by the teachers, and I would never amount to anything, and blah blah blah. So I sort of buckled down for a couple of months, and I'm blessed with a sort of a photographic sort of memory, if you like. I retain things very quickly, and I managed to miraculously managed to pass 5 O-levels, even going through all of this shit that I was going through at the time. And it took me through to college. And all the time I was at college, I went to sort of do a degree in hotel and catering operations and management. All the time I was at college, this is when everything sort of escalated a bit more, really, on the way up, without me really realising it. There were many, many issues. I was still working at this hotel, and I'd bought a little motorbike, and I was drink driving every night. And at 16 years old, I was drinking a lot, without really realising it. But obviously, my mother, no one noticed at all. And it was then that I discovered dope as well, like in the hotel and in college. There was a lot of people smoking dope in those days. It was like heaven to me, and also what we call Billy Whiz, amphetamine sulfate. And I was taking a lot of that. And really, again, if I look back, it was for acceptance, and I was seeking out the sort of bad examples, if you like, making them laugh, joining in with them, and but at the same time, it made me feel great. It made me feel part of something that I'd never been before. It made me accepted, and gave me sort of a self-worth and a self-esteem that I'd never experienced before. And I was taking a lot of stuff in those days, and again, sort of miraculously, I went through. I remember being arrested one night. I went to a Thin Lizzy concert, and this is how excessive I was. I didn't know when to stop. Even in those days, I would go. I'd be the one that was passed out on the floor. Everyone else would be drunk, but I'd be the one who was literally couldn't walk. Because I'd be that either drunk or pilled up or drugged up. I'd be out of it. Went to a Thin Lizzy concert and drank a whole bottle of Pernod Neat during the concert. Collapsed. Ended up having my stomach pumped, and ended up being arrested and put inside Cheapside Prison in Liverpool, which is the roughest place that you can possibly imagine. At that time I was sort of 17 and a half, I think, and then got fined for being drunk and incapable the next day. Turned around, my mother and her friend, her friend from across the road, her husband, they sort of adopted us and made a bit of a project of us, and they were all stood in the court as I turned around, covered in vomit, and having had my stomach pumped the night before, obviously feeling like shit. And really, then when I look back, that would have been a sign for me just to stop there and then. But obviously, that was never going to happen. So that took me to sort of 19 years old, and it was then that I had passed my exams miraculously again, and went to Cambridge. Managed to get a job with a company called Trust House Forte as a duty manager in a hotel, 4-star hotel in Cambridge, as duty manager. And we lived in a staff house there in Portugal Place. I had 5 years in Cambridge. And to cut a long story short, I had my first love there. I met a girl. I was 19, just over 19. Met a girl, and she was 25 and divorced, Irish girl. And I fell sort of head over heels for her. It was the first real sort of thing like that in my life. I'd never had anything like that before, and it wasn't really love when I look back. It was obsession. And she was an alcoholic, unbeknownst to me. She really was, and it was a very destructive relationship. But through her, I ended up leaving the job I was in after a year or so at the hotel, and it was a bad move. And my mother came up because she had high hopes for me in this hotel thing. She straightened out a bit, and she wanted to prove something to my father, I'd be a success, and I'd walked out because of this woman. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, she disowned me, and that was the last time I saw any of my family for 4 years, any of them, my brother included. And I went on a spiral of destruction, basically, coming up to 20 years old. She obviously assisted me and enabled me, this girl I was living with, and it was very abusive. And I managed to get a job across the road in a pub. And I always get on really well with that, because one thing about me is I'm a very, very hard worker. I work extremely hard. Whatever I do, when I set my mind to it and I start enjoying it, then I accomplish and I achieve. And I look back in my and I think, you could have achieved so much more. And I'll go on during the story, and I did achieve a lot, but could have achieved so much more. Anyhow, this girl I was living with, I was working across the road in the pub, and our apartment, our flat, if you like, was across the road. And to cut a long story short, I caught her in bed with another man, and after a massive argument, she stabbed me. Yeah, it was me that caught her in that situation. She was drunk anyway, but she stabbed me and sliced me across the hand. I nearly lost 3 fingers. They had to be sort of stitched back on with a Stanley knife. That's a carpet knife. And at this time, I had nowhere to live. She'd obviously chucked all my stuff out at this stage. I was in a hell of a state. I was drinking heavily. I was using a lot of amphetamine. And anyhow, fortunately, Gladys and Arthur, their names were, the landlord and landlady of the pub I worked in, put me up to it for a bit in their pub, because I did some reliefs for them. Basically, when they went on holiday, I looked after the place, and they trusted me with that, which is great. And I did some reliefs for them. So they put me up while I sort of sorted myself out, if you like. And then I saw an advert in the paper for a doors manager in a nightclub, and I always fancied nightclub work. And basically, I applied for this, not thinking I'd get the job, and I got it. I was in charge of all the doormen. What a situation to put me in at 21 in the state I was in mentally, because it gave me, because Rennell's, the name of the club was, in Cambridge, and it was one of the busiest clubs in that area of England, really trendy, massive 1,000 capacity club. And I was in charge of 12 doormen, and I became a bit of a monster, to be honest with you, because the drug taking really took off then, especially cocaine. Got involved with that, and obviously Carrot was drinking a lot as well, and there was a lot of violence. Well, I can't go into a lot of it for various reasons, but there was a lot of violence, and again, I was trying for acceptance with this group, but I did a really good job, surprisingly, and they promoted me in the club to assistant manager, and I sort of found my niche. I think if I look back at my career, I had 20 odd years being really successful in the pub, restaurants and hotel business. But the few years I had in the nightclub business, which I'll talk about in a minute, were the most, immediate successes of my whole career, because I had a real aptitude for it. It was something, although I sort of could feel an atmosphere, and I knew what people wanted, and I was good at it. And quickly got promoted at this club, and then they offered me a transfer to a club called Isabella's in Leicester as general manager. And this was an amazing club, an underground club, which was one of the biggest and most trendy clubs in the Midlands at the time in England. And I was 21 years old, and it was a live-in position above the nightclub. And I was sort of revered in the town. I had this kudos in the town because I could do people favours in this club, and I used it to my full. I was naive and used it to my full advantage. And it was there I first saw the love of my life, the lady I went on to marry. But it was a good while after that. But I saw she was a regular at the club with her sisters, and I sort of, love at first sight, I suppose it was. But I was in a mess. Because I would basically take cocaine all night, stay up all night, and we had people in that club who were very rich. So basically, after the club shut at 2:00, I would be partying with them all night, cocaine and vodka. At 21, I was a wild man, and I didn't really realise. And then I met, as I say, I managed to ask my wife out, and we started going out. And then I was offered, this is a year or so later, I made the Isabella's really successful. It was, God knows how I did it and kept going. I used to think, how I didn't really think about it. I was just fueled with drugs and alcohol, basically, but I made it a success. And then I was offered a position in a club called Mr. Keese's, a privately owned club by a guy called Martin Kieser, and he turns out to be a bit of a con man in the end. But we built this club. It was became the biggest. It was a 3-story, an Old Bailey's nightclub, with live entertainments, and we built an amazing business there from nothing with money that he'd loaned, basically, with through a con. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was there for a couple of years, and I met some of my heroes. I was a general manager. I was being paid a fortune. I managed to buy a house with the monies I was making. Big money there. It was a 3,500 capacity on 4 stories, and 7 bars and a fast food restaurant in it. Live entertainment. The bands of my childhood, Odyssey, Shalimar, Shack Attack. A lot of people listening to this won't appreciate some of this. There was some big bands of the time, the real thing, all the 70s bands, sort of Slade, and all the Radio 1 DJs appeared there at the time, the big DJs, Sister Sledge. I mean, I can go on the list. The list was amazing. Yeah, some of the people we had appear there were big heroes of mine, and it was all through me, and I revelled in it. And there was massive cocaine dealing going on in the club via this owner and someone he knew from London. It was very heavy. There was kilograms of cocaine coming into the club and being distributed by the doorman. Again, I can't go into all that too deeply, but I was coining it, and I was being given free cocaine. I wasn't having to pay for it, and basically drinking myself into oblivion every night and doing some stuff I'm very, very ashamed of, but making an amazing success of somewhere that was taking in excess of £20,000 a night in 1982, 83, £20,000 a night in 1983. We had some amazing stuff going on there. Anyway, again, at this time, I was quite serious with my future wife, and some stuff I'm not going to mention during this life story that for the sake of embarrassing my wife and family, and I don't want to do that. But we went away on holiday together prior to the year before we got married, before we got engaged. And to cut a long story short, I'd smuggled about 20 grams of cocaine into Cyprus in my pants and everything. God knows, if I'd have been caught, I would have been arrested, obviously, and that would have been that, and no relationship or whatever. But my wife found, if some dropped out, my wife found it, and it all came out. Well, my future wife found it, I should say, and it all came out. And I had to withdraw during that 2-week holiday from cocaine, and I was still drinking a bit, but I was in a mess for that 2 weeks. But when I came back, it turns out that it had all gone tits up at the club, and that was the end of that. I can't go into that for legal reasons either. But that was the best thing that could ever happen, really, because I had a period then where I got clean, and was still drinking a bit. But we went on to get married, and then decided that we wanted to work together. My wife was an accountant, or in accounting, and we wanted to work in the pub, restaurants, and hotel business together. So we got a job with Beefeater Steakhouses as a trainee management couple. And it went on from there, really. We had, this is the first stage of the story I'll tell you, because I don't want this to go on any longer than this. It's already gone on longer than I wanted it to. I had this period of break then for a couple of 3 years where everything was going swimmingly, and we had the miracle of our first daughter arrived, and we managed to, after a couple of promotions, we got our own place in Lichfield called the Fradley Arms, where we were to remain for the next 14, 15 years. But this is the next part of the story, because there was this lull, like I say, before the real problems started, which were in my early 30s when the real problems started. So we were managing this place very successfully. Hotel, restaurant, it was extended, had hotel bills, taking big money, and it was our future. And it was then, during this period, when I'm in my early 30s, just after our second daughter was born, that I discovered opiates. And I'll tell you all about that in the next instalment, because, as I say, this has gone on just too long now. So there's 2 or 3 more instalments of this life story, and I hope that some of you can identify with some of it, and then I'll do sort of a summary at the end of it. But thanks for listening. Don't forget, carpe diem, seize the day, And you know, it's a strange thing, the mind, isn't it? It's a strange thing. So, okay. Much love to you all. Thanks for listening. Bye bye. The next one will be in a couple of days.